you live in Milan, right? So what lake did you go to?
Sure. It's Iseo, which is I-S, spelled I-S-E-O, or Lago d'Iseo, as the Italians would call it. And it's a beautiful little lake. It's only it took an hour and a half, actually. So we left on Saturday morning. So you could go there for half a day, a full day, a day and a night, what have you. And so we've got friends of ours that are pretty keen on cycling, and we don't mind a bit of cycling. We've done a few longer trips, and we wanted to get out of Milan, and so we said, why not? We threw the bikes actually in the car, drove about an hour and a half, got to the southern part of the lake, the first part from one of the closest parts, I suppose, from Milan. Took the bikes out and cycled around it. It's about 60, 65 kilometers, and so. But it's largely flat because it's around the lake. But there's mountains that kind of fall into the lake from a distance. So from a panorama point of view, it's obviously beautiful. And you saw some of that in the photos I sent you. So yeah, we stopped for lunch, had a lovely, nice lunch actually for a couple of hours. It worked out really well. We got back a couple of hours cycling after lunch back to the point where we started. And so, yeah, it's a lovely thing you can do. Anyone can do, from the Milan area and in Lombardy. It's pretty popular. We decided to stay up there. We booked a place, took advantage to stay over Saturday night and come back Sunday to Milan. And that was a lovely spot to stay into, a new place that we discovered in the hills above the lakes.
So first question is why? Obviously, why that lake? I mean, you've got lots of lakes to choose from in northern Italy, right? So why
Sure.
particularly that lake, and how does it compare to some of the others that you've been to?
Yeah, it's a good question, man. I think Lombardy is famous for lakes, and a few other regions have got some great lakes as well. But there's essentially five that are well known to people that live around here, but also well known to Northern Europeans that come from Germany and Austria. They love coming down to the Italian summer and holidaying, spending their summers by the lakes. So they've been doing that probably for centuries. And Lake Iseo, for some reason, I think we'd only been to it once or twice in like 10 years. I can't remember when it was we went there last. So when a friend of mine mentioned it, I thought, yeah, why not? Discover more about it than just a couple of little things that we knew. There's a little island in the middle of the lake, actually, which you can also get a ferry across to and explore. And it's also got a little mountain on it. So it's got its own great panoramic views, and it's got a nice restaurant there. And there might be, I don't know, 300 or 400 or 500 people that live on that actual island, believe it or not. So it was it was an adventure really in that respect, that we wanted to check it out and also get some physical exercise, obviously, and get around the lake, and that was attractive as well. So that's why we chose it this time. We've seen Como a lot more often. We've been to Lago Maggiore, which is another one that's got some beautiful, charming towns on it. And Iseo's got some charming towns too, and Garda, Lake Garda, and then there's Lago d'Orta, which is probably the smallest of the five. But pretty much you can reach all those lakes between like 1 hour to Lake Como at probably the closest, to 2.5 hours to 3 hours to Lake Garda, the most northeast from Milan anyway, right? So yeah.
So you obviously live in Milan, or obviously, I know you live in Milan. You chose city living over lake living. Like, do you have aspirations to move to the lake, or is it the city living? Like, what's kind of like your differentiating factors between choosing a lakeside place and a city place?
Look, we chose a city for reasons related to our kids' education and connections here years and years ago. So we've been here in Milan 15 years now, Rob. And we enjoy it for the sitting living and for our kids' schools and everything, obviously. So there's a need for us to be here, I suppose. I've never really thought about living on a lake. I've had some holidays there. Some people love it. Some people have no problem with it. They love swimming in the lake and obviously boating, skiing, and that kind of thing on the lake. Other people prefer, the coast, the beach, and don't want to visit lakes. And so Italy's obviously got all of that and more. So anyone can choose. We've got clients that are bought by the lakes because they're coming from a different perspective, than us, and they may be first looking for the holiday destination and then falling in love with it so much to say, gee, hang on, maybe they're closer to retirement age or something like that as well, or wanting to spend more time in Italy than just a couple of weeks, and then they say, hey, we could make this last longer in this throughout the year, or even live here eventually. And it's a pretty good lifestyle. I mean, in the summers are cooler because there always seems to be a bit of wind and a bit of air on the lakes to make things a bit cooler. The winters can be obviously the flip side of that, can be obviously very cool, but you don't have the same extent of the winters that you get in other countries or in the mountains much higher up, of course. So there's variety, and they're also not too far from the mountains where you can ski. Some of those mountains are within touching distance. So if you're also a skier or you love the snow, then those northern lakes are also attractive to a lot of people for that reason. I knew a couple of people were looking around this particular lake. Actually, I thought about them a little bit when I was riding around, and checking out a couple of really nice towns, trying to work out where we're going to have lunch basically on that day. And I thought about one or two people, but I haven't actually gone through with a purchase right on there with a particular client. But we have on Como and Garda and Lake Maggiore. And so on Lake Maggiore, there's these beautiful towns called Arona, right? Arona and Stresa. And we've helped people buy in those towns. So they're basically towns that are right on the lake. You can walk, but they have charming towns with cobblestone streets and nice restaurants and flowers everywhere, and views between the laneways to the lake and that kind of thing. And in fact, one of the clients is also doing a fairly long renovation, and we help them with getting the trades and a builder and that organised after they purchase to try and renovate this place by the lake. And they've got the ideas of letting it out when they're not here. So they can't be here 12 months of the year. They'll come back. There's actually an English client that has bought that particular property in Orta, who's renovating it now. So that's been a journey for him in learning the ropes beyond just buying. But we helped him look into the due diligence of that property before he purchased it, and he can walk down to the lake. It's not like right on lakeside, but he's about a 5-minute walk down, and he loves it. So yeah, everyone has their own preferences and things like that, and the lakes have all got something different to offer. I mean, they're all big enough that you can kind of get lost in and spend a day or 2 or 3 or 4 easily exploring. And they've also, many of them have got several different towns around the lake dotted around that to explore, different ways of living and atmospheres and environments, and population levels are different in all of them. So there's quite a bit more to explore than you realize until you get there.
I mean, ultimately, yeah. I mean, the photos you sent, obviously, right round the lake, and just looking across this, like with the mountains and the backdrop, and just the still waters and things like that. When we spoke last time, or when we spoke before, we talked about like Italian properties and how that if you're coming from the UK, obviously you might be looking at a new build or something like that. My vision of an Italian town by the lake is old stone. Like you may already mentioned cobbled streets, but old stone and things like that. What kind of like, and you mentioned renovations. Uh, are properties, or what kind of like renovation level do we actually need? Would people need to think about when it comes to property around there? Are there things ready to move into? Presumably the massive villas and things like that. But what kind of work would people be expecting? What kind of prices would they be looking at for different types of properties?
Look, I think in those areas you can essentially find anything from 130, 40, 50,000 right up to the millions, as you mentioned, with villas and things like that. They tend to be done and completed, obviously. Although there's also some abandoned villas too that need renovation. You can pick up for a fraction of what it would be completed, and then tackle the renovation yourself. There's plenty of resources and building companies and people that, because of that proximity too, the buildings and engineering and surveying resources and those contractors could be close to the lake, but they also could be closer to Milan, having projects in both places, right? So I think that you obviously want to be careful about the market value of the property when you buy, and building in your construction costs. Is it going to be still at the level of the market when you're finished? Now, that's something important to a lot of people, especially coming from, I think, our British clients, American, Canadian, South African, Australian clients, all of that. They think about those things keenly. But a lot of Italians and maybe other Southern Europeans and that, they're thinking more for lifestyle and long-term future, and maybe just holding it even for indefinitely. And so for them, they're not too worried about, are they spending too much on the deck or the bathroom or the balcony or the terrace, or getting those stones restored as best as possible. So, they're not thinking about resale value within 10 years, so they're a bit more freer with the way they invest. So you got to be careful then. If you are more concerned, or you're thinking you might want to sell within 10 years, then clearly you got to do your numbers to understand that you're not going to price yourself out of the market if you want to sell and recoup that cost, right? And so I think you just got to keep an understanding of the cost per square meter of building or renovating in the particular place that you're buying in, and that can vary across Italy. So the costs of, in the mountains or places that are harder to access could be up to €3,000 a square meter, and then on the flat plains in the middle of Italy, in some places it might be closer to 1,000 to 1,500 per square meter. So it's too easy for people to say this is what it is and what it costs. It's really depends on the geography and the place where you're at, and that's something that someone on the ground can help you with. And obviously the contractor and the builders themselves, if you can find one that you can trust and you refer to, then they're going to give you that information so you can get started and be informed before you buy.
So I've been guilty of this, right? So I haven't been to one of the lakes yet. It's been on my list for years. My parents have been, and they've
Have
been
to
like,
do it.
you will love it. You've got to do it, right? But
Well, a
I've
couple of hours
already
on the
caught,
plane. Come on.
sorry?
So a couple of hours on the plane. Come on.
I
You
know
can
it's
do
October.
it.
I'll be definitely out in October. Um, so, but I've already caught myself looking at potential villas. Right, you go online, you have a look, and it's like, oh my god, there's one there for 80 grand, 90 grand, 100 grand, and things like that. But obviously, needs a lot of work, a lot of modernization. How difficult is it? And what kind of regulations do you actually have in terms of in the UK? We have conservation areas and things like that. What kind of rules do you have to abide by when you're looking at a property like that, where you have clear plans to renovate, and what kind of challenges are you likely to face? Yeah.
Sure. Well, I'm not sure if we're going to have enough time in this chat to run through all of them.
Yeah,
There are
I'm not
plenty of rules.
expecting detailed lists and things like that, but yeah, are there regulations? I would imagine the locals actually have more to say than maybe the building regulations, but I'm happy to be
Well,
corrected.
well, I think there's a few general over principles about Italy and the way they approach property and preserving tradition and preserving workmanship that's has been valued over time. I think that you should have in mind, right? And that might help to explain to some of the rules and approach to them. So, there's many comuni or municipalities that have specific rules, and they all have an urban planning mechanism that gets updated after every few years, depending on the commune, and that'll indicate what can be built, whether there's any room for additional residential volume, whether that's in your plot that you buy or whether it's in the whole council area and that kind of thing. And they'll have detailed rules and regulations too about the style of the place that you're going to create and the materials that you use and that kind of thing, because they're very concerned with keeping nearly every house and every place, I believe, in Italy, they want to make sure that it suits the environment, right? And it suits and it respects the history and other properties around, and you just don't have carte blanche, as it were, to come in and build a condominium or a block of flats just because you see that there's an opportunity in the market commercially to do that in whatever style that you think would be great for that area. So, detailed plans need to be made typically more often than not, based on the renovations that you're undertaking and presented to the local comune, who then get the chance to approve it. And depending again on the style of permission that you request, there are different styles of permission for different types of renovations and sizes of renovations. So you can't possibly sort of foresee what they'll be, I think, based on your previous experience. of renovating perhaps in another country. So that's all information that's in front of you that you need to find out when you're starting to get serious about doing some renovation. I mean, clearly, if you just want to do up a bathroom or a kitchen, you don't have to be so meticulous. But if you're adding rooms, adding terraces, increasing the living space in some way, adding garages, or even rebuilding something that's ruined, you need to be careful. You may think that because it's in a state that you find it might be run down, doesn't necessarily mean that the council says you're free to just knock it down and build something that's appropriate for your taste and style. So you have to be careful about that kind of thing. I'm not sure if that answers entirely your question, but it's kind of like, it's case by case, and you've got to work that out once you find the particular place that you're falling in love with.
Yeah, so from my limited knowledge, that's kind of what I anticipate. It's so I I spent some time in a conservation area in the south of England, and the rules around even just changing the windows are really, really restrictive. But it's not necessarily based on like passion per se. It's more that no, just want to maintain this thing. So therefore, there were lots of regulations, and they're very kind of rigid. But I've always kind of well, I envisage the Italians and Europeans actually generally, and I think I've seen projects in Spain where the locals actually there wasn't actually particular controls around the regulation around the buildings, but the locals had a big thing to say, and they got in touch with the local council, the mayor, and the mayor gets involved in things like that because they care passionately about the place that they live, and they don't want to see the local heritage destroyed. We spoke previously about how when you're buying off an Italian, they actually really care about who they're selling it to because they're passionate about the place that they spent time in, that they grew up in, that they lived in, that might have been a family home for a couple of centuries. So there is an emotional element to it as well as the kind of like
Sure.
technical red tape. Yes, you might be able to do something because red tape allows it, but my understanding is you've got to consider more than that. You can't just come in with a hammer and go, right, I'm going to put something awesome in here. That's kind of my take. So yes, I think that pretty much answers that side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I've experienced much local activism, if you like, around someone coming in next door and them having a say in it so much. I think that actually in Italy, anyway, obviously there's nuances between different countries, and in Italy, anyway, the local planning rules and regulations are fairly detailed and are very protective and conservation oriented to begin with. So from my point of view, and others may have a slightly different view, but from my point of view, you're already limited in some respects, and it's less likely you're going to create something that's offensive and gaudish and disappointing for the neighbours, in my opinion.
And also, if you're moving there because of the gorgeous environment, right?
Exactly. You want
So
to
why
keep
why would
that.
you want to put like a modern thing or whatever in that's not sympathetic to the style? Um, so loads of people will see a property and then they'll go and do their research and things like that. And obviously translators and whatever. How complex can it be to kind of like have that kind of initial dream to doing your own information? At what point is it a good idea to actually engage someone like yourself to talk through the process, but also make sure that you avoid any pitfalls and that actually you find the right property for your project or for your like holiday home or to find that right balance between city living and lake living.
Mm, mm. I think from that okay, you could approach this from a couple of different perspectives, and really, I think people are going to be affected by where they are on the journey, at what stage they're at, how urgent it is your Italian property project, and those kinds of things. So it's so easy these days to get online and start looking and searching and investigating and reaching out, right? So we can assume that 80% of us are probably going to be doing that in any case. So I think, first of all, you want to understand what are the limitations in what I'm seeing, and that's important because you might say, well, we've looked at everything, and you may have spent 2 weeks or 3 weekends looking on your specific filters of what you're looking for and found, 5, 6, 10, 20, even more properties and feel that you've got the market. Well, to speak to a property professional, somebody that's been in the market and understands what the market's all about and how it operates, you can't quite appreciate whether you're actually covering the market, whether there's things that you're missing, whether you're making assumptions about properties that are listed there because they've been listed for some time, what it means about those properties or what you can offer as a result, because you tend to be using your filter of buying before in your country. And because you can also look on a portal online and get access to so many properties information, and you can do that in your own country, we can be lulled into this sense of thinking that, well, they operate in the same way. So I think it's never too early to talk about the culture of buying property, what to expect on the other end of the line when you do finally make a contact with an Italian agent or owner or professional, and who you speak to first matters, I think. But once you are in that search process, a good time to reach out, to us is when you're thinking about, am I getting close enough where I might think of putting in an offer? Because that's when it's obviously more important, where the rubber's about to hit the road. You don't want to start to commit yourself to something, and before you know it, you might have a contract in front of you, and you've got to make a decision quickly. Perhaps there's a competitive situation that you find yourself in. Those times are when people could be prone to making an error in judgment. It may be an error in translation, or understanding what's expected of them or what comes next after this point. And unless you've done it before in Italy, I would say to anyone, how can you know? How can you anticipate any of those things? So that's what we do. We help guide people through those steps, why it's important to think about certain things before you make an offer, to think about a due diligence process, how you're going to achieve that on this particular property, which may be straightforward, but it may not be, depending on the characteristics of the property and its location, or the speed of the transaction, if it's competitive or not, and things like that. So these things, I think, they're hard to anticipate unless you've done it before in Italy. You may have done it in another country, and that's great. You're starting off better than never having bought property before. However, it's significantly different. So it's quite easy to fall for a trap or a pitfall along the way. So that's why, we help people be aware of those things and anticipate them for them, so that you don't need to be stuck feeling frustrated and delayed by the system that you don't appreciate yet or understand.
There's one thing that people could do before they get in contact with you, or before they kind of take that more formal step. What would you say? What one bit of research could they do that would actually make this like a more feasible plan for them?
Well, I think, to be honest, there's something more simple than that. Is book your next trip. In other words, when you're coming.
It's, you're basically telling me to get a flight, right?
Exactly, because you can look for hours and hours and days, and everybody can online and dream online and think, oh, that could be absolutely perfect, or or whatever you think. But until you get on the ground, you look around, you breathe the air, you buy that coffee or gelato, you walk on the sand, you walk on the track or jump on the bike, like I just described. You can't get a real sense, I don't think, for somewhere where you really want to live, or even holiday for longer than a week or a weekend. And once you do that, your perspective just changes. So obviously everyone can't come to Italy every weekend and all of that to see a different property, but if you've got a plan to know when you're coming, then the other pieces start to fall in place. And then your brain will just, I think, naturally let you know, okay, I better now find out about A, B, and C because now I'm going to go there and see this thing, but I'm not really ready. Or do I need a mortgage? Do I need a lawyer? Do I need notary? How does it work? And then those questions will come up, and we're here to answer them. And that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, basically, I have to fly out, right? I have to come and see you.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. I need a holiday. Daniel, thank you so much. Like I say, I'm going to go and look through the photos and start dreaming again. Maybe look at some flights and book my little trip out there.
Can't wait.
It's been ages since I jumped on a bike, but your weekend has just kind of inspired me to do something along those lines. So I think I need to get my arse
Great.
into gear, quite frankly. Thank you
You
very much,
should.
Daniel. We'll speak
Pleasure.
again in a couple of weeks, hopefully. Hopefully another weekend in somewhere amazing in Italy that we could talk about.
Absolutely. I'm sure there'll be one. No problem. We'll be doing some more now. We're into summer. So once you start, you can't stop, Rob. So I warn you. All
Danger,
right.
danger. Cheers, Daniel. Thank you.
Take care. Cheers.